Okay, good morning, everybody. It's our pleasure that we have Dr. Barbara here, and she has taken time out for all of us. And you might have seen her profile. She is very popular faculty. Uh, she teaches the world learn how to learn. So before I'm not going to take much of time here. I will request our Pro Vice Chancellor Dr. Mahiskar sir to introduce her and welcome her to NMIMS University, and then later on she will take over and she'll take the session.
Good morning to you all. Let me first welcome Dr. Barbara Oakley, who is from University of Auckland. We already had a professor the other day with whom we signed a MOU. So I have met Professor Oakley in some webinar I felt where we talked about neurons and so on. So faculty members who have come from NMIMS schools, DJ Sangvi, SBMP and other schools of NMIMS, and of course MPSTME. I must say that we are indeed fortunate to have her here because we have seen her online. I have also seen this course and learned this course, how to learn, and also I think a course which she put on during the COVID, teaching and learning online. Yes. That also the course very interesting to all of us. In fact, we had made this course mandatory for all of the faculty members of our trust and engineering school because we were to deliver all these courses maybe for a year online. So we're indeed fortunate to have you here, and I welcome you to this NMIMS deemed to be university. But before you embark on this interaction, I must briefly give you a background of what we are going to hear from her and what she is all about. Of course, she is a professor, renowned professor, and she comes from engineering background. And besides the engineering proficiency which she has, she is also known as the author of the world's most popular online course with about 3.5 million learners. The online course which Coursera has put on, Learning How to Learn. This is a very, very popular course. And if you are not gone through this course, I'll suggest you go through it as early as possible. Just to give a brief background about Dr. Barbara, she not only engages on pedagogy and so on, but her work explores the intersection of neurosciences and social behavior of a human being and how it will help you to teach and learn better. In fact, her research has featured in proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. She has also been the recipient of numerous awards, including the American Society of Engineering Education Award. And today, for the entire focus will be on how do we use GenAI for enhancing learning and teaching. I must tell Dr. Barbara that at our university, we have been taking a lot of initiatives on AI and GenAI. There is a group that works on this entire initiative. Koteshwar is a part of this group, and we are very actively working on this. They have come a long way from formulating a policy to know how to penetrate to the students and faculty and so on. And I must say that Coursera has been a big support to us in this entire journey. Not only today, but about 2018, we were the first university who signed for Coursera on campus, where there was an event at Delhi. So, and now with GenAI and AI, we are using this in a big way in our building of courses, building of modules in the courses and so on. Today morning we were talking about what are the challenges we are facing as educators. The same challenge you can discuss with her. I think she'll provide very innovative solutions to most of our challenges. But this part of the world is having unique challenges. It's not the challenges of ones faced in maybe the European continent or the American continent. We have the challenges of massification of education, maintaining the quality of education, and so on. So these are challenges which I think she will also help us in how to come about. Of course, the challenge of distraction in a class, attention span, which all of us face day in and out, remains global. There is no difference whether you go to US or go to Europe or India or anywhere in the world. This is one challenge which we are facing. I think when she discusses with you, you can also discuss with her what are the challenges you are facing and how and what in which manner she suggests to you to improve on these aspects. So I welcome you all to this interactive session, I must say. I suggest you make the best use of this session because we don't get speakers of this level and this ability and such a vast experience very frequently. We get once or twice in a year maybe of this level. So welcome again, Dr. Barbara. Welcome to this session. Thank you.
Let's see. Does this work? Oh, it does. Yay! Okay. So, it is such a privilege to be here, and I have to say that your leadership at this university is visionary, and so it is really a privilege to be able to share with such visionary leadership and faculty. So, let us go ahead and begin. And what I'd like to start with is I just want to remind you of the quote of Fei Li, who says, AI will not replace humans, but humans who know how to use AI will replace those who don't. So a new revolution is upon us, and whether we like it or we don't like it, we have to kind of learn to ride that wave. And so what I want to give you today are some tools to help you be able to successfully ride that wave. Now, you just signed an MOU with my home university, Oakland University, and some of you may have heard of the town in California named Oakland. And so you think, oh, she's from California, Oakland, palm trees and things like that. Well, guess what? No, I'm from Oakland University in Michigan, and it's cold there in the winter. So that's me going to work on a typical February day. And one of the courses I teach with Terry Sinowski is called Learning How to Learn. And Terry is the Francis Crick professor at the Salk Institute. And this is Terry when he's taking a break from his day job in La Jolla, California, going out for a jog. So that's one of the great things about online teaching and learning is that not only can students get together from very different places, but professors can get together from very different places as well. So, to my surprise, I was invited to speak at Harvard. I was a nervous wreck because, it's like Harvard. It's big. And I walked into the room and I was even more nervous because it was packed, standing room only, all around the edges. And I thought, why are there so many people here? It turns out that our one little course that was made for virtually nothing, mostly in my basement, that's my basement, had on the order as the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses put together and made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. And what this tells you is that learners all around the world are really interested in practically useful, solidly research-based information that's funny, that helps you to learn effectively. So we've done lots of other courses. There's good courses on online teaching and teaching in general, and career change, learning for children. I have a new course coming out with Jules White of Vanderbilt on accelerating your learning with ChatGPT. So what I'm talking about today. There will be much more than that in this new MOOC. But what I'd like to begin with is, let's talk about what is ChatGPT. A lot of you know that there's something about it's trained initially by predicting the words in sentences. And so you have a sentence, and something about these ChatGPT like large language models, they train them by predicting words. And that is part of how they're trained. But actually, the latest, the greatest, what is behind generative AI in general is that it is able to mathematically relate words to one another. So it's like there's a vector space of where words cluster together that are similar in meanings. But if you think back, about 5 years ago, there were terrible translations available. Like, did you ever go and look at how it translated on Google Translate? It was just awful. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to anthropomorphize. So I'm going to speak of generative AI as if it was a human. It's not a human, but it makes it easier if I speak about it that way. So what would happen 5 years ago is that the computer would go along, and by the time it got to the end of a sentence, it would forget what was at the beginning of a sentence. So as you can imagine, it's really hard to do good translations that way. But because of the magic of this one little creation that I am going to mention, they are able, generative AI can actually relate not only words in sentences, but words to entire essays, all to one another, and even to not only that sentence to what's going on in essays, but what's going on throughout the web. There's a relationship that has been that can be numerically established. So, what was the magic that made ChatGPT happen? It all goes back to a paper called "Attention is All You Need" that was published in 2017. So I'll give you a teeny tiny bit of history. So Terry Sanowski, my co-instructor, he is the president of the Neural Information Processing Society that published this paper. And he told me, when this paper was published, we just didn't think it was really anything important at all. Now, mind you, the conference this was published in this conference is so important in AI that when it opens, typically there are about 8,000 places available, and typically those 8,000 places fill in less than 10 minutes. So it's a really important conference. But this particular paper was relegated to a little side poster that was presented by a grad student. Nobody thought it was important. But what it established, what it's laid forth, was the idea of the transformer. And this is the magic. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of insight into what a transformer does. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into great detail. But transformers, what they do is cool stuff. They allow us to even, have you seen the website Suno? Oh, it is so neat. Okay, so I went to Suno and I entered in "Attention is All You Need," which is this paper that was published in 2017. And it wrote a song for me about recurrent thoughts as they go in loops. And this is the website here. It created a nice song using AI. And think about it. If you have like a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse or someone you want to impress, go write a song for them on Suno, and you'll wow them. But this is the kind of creative new thing that generative AI allows us to do. So what is behind a transformer? If we look, it's got two parts. You know how you'll write the prompt as you're asking a question, like how do I go visit the home of Bollywood stars while I'm in Mumbai, right? So that's my prompt. I put it into what's called the encoder, and here, right here, where it says positional encoding, this is this deceptively simple little circle right there. That's where the magic is. That's what they invented. It's a way of numerically analyzing words. But anyway, you put your prompt into the encoder, and voila, out of the decoder comes whatever it comes back with as a result of your prompt. Now, for our purposes here, what we're really interested in is that if you look at the flow of information through transformers in AI, it is remarkably similar to the flow of information in the human brain. And indeed, AI, generative AI in particular, has advanced because it has kind of taken ideas from neuroscience, and actually neuroscience, when it's gotten stuck on things, it's looked towards generative AI and AI for some of its advances. So these two fields of AI and neuroscience have helped one another over the decades, and they work together. So what this really tells us, though, is that if we understand a little bit about how the brain works, we can actually use generative AI more effectively. So let's go in. I'm just going to give you just a tiny bit of neuroscience, and then we're going to come back to AI, and you're going to see what that relationship is. So the brain is a pretty complicated mechanism, but it's got a fundamental building block, which is the neuron. And there's about 86 billion neurons in the brain, and they're very simple. As far as its operation, it's got like these legs that are called dendrites. It's got those little knobs that come off the legs. Those are called dendritic spines. And then it has an arm that reaches out. That's called the axon. And that's pretty much all you need to know about neurons. What neurons do is they like to reach out and they send signals to one another. So those signals jump across that little gap called a synapse and go on to the next neuron. And when you're learning something, they are just sending signals and making connections with one another. So as you learn something, you are making connections between neurons in long-term memory. If you don't make those connections in long-term memory, you haven't learned it. So unfortunately, educators and psychologists over the last couple decades have sometimes said, you don't need to remember things because you can always look it up. Well, would I speak Hindi if I just use Google Translate to look it up? Of course not. In fact, a lot of my colleagues in engineering, in schools of engineering, actually throughout the U.S. and schools of science, they're from places that still acknowledge that some degree of rote learning is quite important. You need to remember things. That's part of learning. But how do you reinforce, how do you strengthen those connections between neurons? As it turns out, if you just practice, you can strengthen those connections. But there's one thing, sometimes students will be very busy and they'll learn something in class, they actually understand what you're saying, but then they don't look over their notes for maybe a couple of weeks. So what happens in the meantime? If they haven't practiced, their little synaptic janitors can sweep those connections away. So it's, you may have learned it, but you forget it. So what you want to do in learning is not only learn the material, but also practice so that you can strengthen those neurons and you can easily pull the ideas to mind. Now, one thing that I want to bring out is the vital importance of metaphor. So, if you're learning, let's say you as a teacher are trying to explain a new concept. It is often easier to explain that new concept if it has some similarities with something the student already knows. So let's say that you are teaching about electrical current flow. It can be a nice metaphor to explain electrical current flow is like that pre-existing concept that all students have, which is the flow of water, that current flow. So if you say, oh, you know how water flows, it's kind of like what electrical current flow is like. So if you use metaphors from previous knowledge that the student has, you can communicate ideas much more effectively. But so when I was working on the book, A Mind for Numbers, I sent out emails to thousands of professors around the world who were considered top teachers in their profession. And I asked them for insight into the manuscript. And shocking percentages said, I'll be glad to give you some insight. And they give me some great, perceptions, ideas, feedback, and so forth. But one thing that surprised me, that these professors would often say kind of on the side, they say, there's this one little thing I do, and it really helps my teaching, but I don't tell the other professors that I do this. And what was this other thing that they did that was so important in their teaching? It was the use of metaphor and analogy. And they didn't tell other teachers about it because the other professors would be like, oh, well, no wonder you're seen as such a good professor. You make it so easy for your students. But isn't that our job as professors? To help make this material easier for our students? Actually, as research is showing, learning is really hard. It's not this super easy thing. It's hard. So the easier we can make it, the more enticing we can make it for our students to be learning. Now, we know that we can come up with a metaphor for virtually anything. But at some level, every metaphor breaks down. But when it breaks down, you just throw it away and you get a new metaphor. So, like at a quantum level, water flow is not a good metaphor for electrical current flow. So you say we have to get another metaphor for that. But, good luck finding a metaphor for quantum physics. But how do we come up with metaphors to help our students? Now, in the past, I've said, you go to websites that have those particular, they specialize in chemistry. They give you metaphors for chemical reactions and so forth. But now it's so much easier because all you have to do is go to ChatGPT, go to one of those generative AI platforms and ask for a metaphor. So, for example, let's say you're teaching Python programming. So you want to explain to your students what the difference is between main guard and scope. All you have to do is go to ChatGPT, as I did, and it says think of main guard as the gatekeeper to a castle, and scope is the various rooms within the castle. I even got a nice picture from ChatGPT, and it also gave me a lot more information about how I could teach this metaphor. So using metaphor, if you just go in and ask a generative AI platform to help you come up with a metaphor, it can be super powerful. Now, one thing I want you to do is I want you to be thinking of these large language models like ChatGPT, like Claude, like Pi and Gemini and Perplexity and all of these Mistral and so forth. These are like car engines. If you learn how to drive a car and somebody just changes the engine of the car, the driving is still the same. So if you learn how to use one platform, you can use really most of the platforms without any trouble. So try not to be overwhelmed with, oh, there's all these different platforms and they'll all say ours is best. And then you're trying to learn about everything. They're all kind of car engines. They do have different characteristics, a different feel. So for example, one of my favorites is Claude. And you'll find that if you go to Claude, you can get more, I get more in-depth kind of insights into, like if I load a paper on and ask, what are the main concepts in this paper? In fact, let's look at the international giants of the large language model world. So developing these engines is really expensive. So many of the world's largest companies are the ones who are affiliated or funding these large language models. So you'll find that, for example, Google is affiliated with Gemini, and Claude, that's my favorite, that's affiliated with Amazon, Microsoft with ChatGPT, and Meta with Llama. And then in the East, there are similarly very major platforms that have come out. Now, one thing that is worthwhile to look at is the idea of a context window. What is a context window? That's like how much gas at a time you can put into your car. It's how much you can feed in. So I'll tell you why this is important. So, for example, I was asked to write the foreword for the Japanese edition of my book of Uncommon Sense Teaching. I don't know anything about Japanese teaching. How can I write the foreword for the book? So because Claude had a big enough context window. If you look, it says 200,000 tokens. That's right now. And that's a little bit less than or more than 200,000 words. It's about maybe 150,000 words. So a token is a little bit smaller than a word. And so that meant that I could load a PDF that had all 70,000 words of my book. I could load it onto Claude, and I could say, okay, now what you want to always be doing is telling your large language model what persona you want it to assume. So I told it, I want you to be the world's leading expert on Japanese educational systems. And that tells it what to go and look and kind of get into mind when it's, so to speak, when it is trying to analyze your work. So I told it, you're the world's leading expert in Japanese educational systems. Here's my book. Analyze how my book is supporting current Japanese systems, how it gives fresh insights about neuroscience, and how it also gives fresh insights to the Japanese educational system from neuroscience about what the latest cutting edge findings are. So I loaded that into Claude, came back with all this really nice information about how my book supported Japanese teaching, how it advanced Japanese teaching. I took that information, incorporated it into my foreword, wrote it all up, sent it off to my Japanese editor, and she goes, "Oh, how do you know so much about the Japanese educational system?" And I was like, okay. I'm just good. No. But see, this can allow you to learn about things that you never really, and to have at your disposal this expertise that we've never had before. So the context window is important. Now, Gemini looks really good, like it's got this huge context window, 1,000,000, but personally, I haven't found Gemini so far to be nearly as good at analyzing some of the materials and really perceptively coming. Like, I might enter in an email. Let's say I draft an email and I say, look at this email and tell me if it is an appropriate response to this person. And if I go to Claude, it'll say, well, it's nice, but you could have been more diplomatic here, and you also missed this other bit of information that they were asking for. It will be much more perceptive, whereas ChatGPT and Gemini, in my experience, are not really as good that way. Now, I should say, there was 149 foundational large language models released in 2023. So if you're overwhelmed with, oh, this new one, that new one, the latest new one is Mistral from France. And that actually seems to be kind of climbing above the rest. It's number 4 by some rankings in how powerful it is. So I've yet to play with it, but I want to. So what is a large language model? It will help us if we look at the human brain. So remember I told you that we have a set of links, or a cluster of connected neurons that we develop in long-term memory when we learn something. But what I didn't tell you was there's 2 pathways that we can use to create those neural links. And don't worry, you don't need to remember the names of these pathways, but just remember that those links actually have different characteristics. And as we'll see, this relates fundamentally to what's going on with large language models. So working memory is what we hold consciously in mind. So as you are learning right now, your working memory, which I love to symbolize with this little octopus or like a quadrupus, it's got 4 arms, it's taking information, sending it through the hippocampus to long-term memory. And then we have the other pathway, which is that automatic pathway that goes through the basal ganglia. And we need both pathways to be able to learn effectively. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective. I'm going to say that declarative pathway is this sort of blue-gray box there. And the automatic pathway is that orange box. And if we're thinking about things, then our conscious awareness, so our working memory and our hippocampus, we're kind of consciously aware of those processes. So if we're solving a problem, our hippocampus and our working memory is consciously working through the problem, and then we can tell whether we've solved it. But then we've got this non-conscious basal ganglia way of learning. So let's say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hit the baseball. Hit the baseball. Okay, now somehow magic happens in the basal ganglia, and then we know whether or not we hit the baseball. that magic of what is learning how to hit the baseball, we practice, we do it again and again, is all supported by a deep hidden set of layers of neurons. So those little circles represent neurons. The lines are just connections between the neurons. And as you are learning, for example, how to hit a baseball, you practice once. And so look, there's the practice, and you get a value function. Did I hit the ball? And yes, you did. Or maybe no, you didn't. But you're doing it over and over again, and you're learning how to hit the baseball. You're creating that neural net of knowledge about how to hit the baseball. Some connections are strengthened as you're learning, others are weakened. And what is remarkable is that this whole process is very like how large language models operate and are trained. So as they're initially being trained, they have a large set of deep neural networks that are being trained to predict. Did you predict the right word? No, you didn't. Try again. No, you didn't. Try again. Oh, I got it right. It's training in this way. So you develop what are called weights between, that is the strength of the connection between some of those sort of artificial neurons. Now, what happens when a human gets whacked on the head and they have damage to their prefrontal cortex? What can happen is they can lose consciousness, and even when they are sort of moving around and things, they can make things up. They can fabulate and hallucinate. The thing about artificial intelligence is it has that automatic system that we're not aware of. We're not conscious of what's going on. We only know what's going in and what comes out, but not what's inside of it. But our conscious, so we have this conscious aspect of our learning abilities. But in humans that have this kind of taken out, they hallucinate or confabulate, and that's just like what we see in artificial intelligence, in generative AI. It can make stuff up because it doesn't have a consciousness that's also overlooking what's going on and kind of overriding when that confabulation starts taking place. So, for us as professors, this has made our life really hard, right? Because this whole business with ChatGPT and everything, it's not only that large language models can make things up, but they've pulled the rug out from under us as professors, because now we can't give students homework and ask them to go off and think about things. We can't ask them to go off and work on an essay and write it, because they can go to ChatGPT and it can do all the thinking for them, thinking of some sort. So there's good aspects of large language models, and there's bad aspects. But here's the important thing for us to remember as professors, and that it relates to something called the Flynn effect. So the Flynn effect is that from the 1930s to the 1970s, what they've discovered is that IQ scores have been rising. So researchers went and looked carefully at all of this, and they concluded that the reason that IQ scores were going up, people were in some sense getting smarter, is because of better educational opportunities, which is a wonderful thing. Except here's the problem. Since the 1970s, IQ scores have been going down. So if it's education that made it go up, what's going on with the decline? As it turns out, right there in the 1970s, something special happened. Calculators came out. And when calculators came out, all of a sudden, many educators said, we don't need to teach our students to remember things anymore. They can always just go look it up. No need to remember times tables or anything like that. And so that meant that students were not getting that internal sense, for example, of the relationship between numbers. So we stepped away from telling people you've got to get those neural links of learning in your own mind if you want to be learning something. So it's important for us to remember today, now that this new generative AI has come out, your job as a teacher is all the more important. We have to be putting into students' minds and motivating students to be learning, because if they don't, those IQ scores will continue to go down. So I want to step back now and let's look again at this world of large language models. So we've got, these are some of the Western ones, and there's many apps and tools that have come available for us. And most of these grow out of ChatGPT because it was first out of the gate. But we will be seeing that there will be more apps related to some of these other platforms. So from ChatGPT, we see, for example, a plethora of writing assistants. Now, one thing, so some of these writing assistants, they can help you to write more easily, but they can also help you to learn more lightly. So you have to be a little careful, but what I love about some of these assistants is they can actually find research articles. For example, if you look at the research, the sort of the basket full of, these are some of the most prominent research article or research assistants growing out of ChatGPT. They can help you, if you use them right, to not only research your papers better, but you can find connections with things you've never even thought of before. One thing I want to warn you about, though, is there's something called a wrapper. A wrapper is like recently there's been a little bit of controversy involving Jasper. So Jasper, as you can see, is that writing assistant right down at the bottom on the left. And what people are finding is they can do pretty much the same thing just by going directly to ChatGPT, because that's the underlying mechanism that Jasper is using. So sometimes it may or may not be worth paying the extra money for getting one of these extra add-ons. I do find, however, so these research papers, they are trained not just on the web, but often they're trained on these research affiliated apps. They're trained on actual research papers. So Semantic Scholar, for example, is trained on over 200 million research articles. So when it's doing its research, it's pretty good. I particularly like this SCITE _ that I can ask a question and it can come back and it gives me a really pretty well validated set of references and kind of what the latest findings are. Now you, of course, as the researcher, have to use that conscious, deliberative mind of yours to decide whether it's right or not, but it can help you find things that you might not have even found on your own. There's also all sorts of things like Live to Internet, like Copilot. There's if you're looking for lesson plans or something to help you with your lesson planning, you can take pictures of your notes and put it into some of these and ask it to devise a good lesson plan that will hook your students right at the beginning of your class, no matter, and I don't care if you're teaching Maxwell's equations or thermodynamics, it'll give you some interesting ideas for these kinds of things. There's creative productivity platforms like Canva and Gamma, lots of coding affiliated growing through Llama, which is open source. In other words, they excuse me, they make publicly available what the weights are in those neural nets, which sounds really good until you realize that criminals can also get these neural nets and use them to train it for their own nefarious purposes. But then there's imagery like DALL-E. There's lots of, some of them grow from ChatGPT, some grow from external, companies. There's, and Gemini has Runway, which is really coming on strong. There's some other new video apps that are out there, and they can be really quite extraordinary. So if you're teaching history, for example, you can ask it to go back and create a photorealistic image of a famous historical figure from the 1500s, or all sorts of very interesting things, and these are really getting good. So some of this imagery grows from the book Teaching with AI, which I think is a really good book. So I highly recommend. And they're doing a webinar that's starting in September. That's Bowen and Watson. And there's ChatGPT and the Future of AI, which is written by my co-instructor, Terry Sinowski, and Ethan Mullick's Co-Intelligence. These are wonderful practical books that will give you great insight into the area. Of course, there's good theoretical books that are also quite readable, and my favorites are Fei-Fei Li's The Worlds I See, and the alignment problem sounds like a real bore, but it gives you all sorts of insight into how we really learn, how students really learn, like how was curiosity modeled in by computers. It's a fascinating book, and there's a good worldwide overview with AI superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee. So there's great courses on generative AI by who else? Coursera, and Jules White is my co-instructor for our upcoming Accelerate Your Learning with ChatGPT. So that is coming soon here, and I think it'll come out at the end of this month. And I also have Critical Thinking in the ChatGPT era, so that's coming out as well. I have oodles more material, but I don't want to go on without, why don't we take like a 4 or 5 minute break? You can think about what's going on, and then when we come back, if you have questions, I have a million more slides, and I probably have a slide that might help answer your question. So let's take a little break. Okay, 5 minutes, and we'll be back. Everybody's still. So let us recommence. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone brave enough to answer or ask questions? I can do the trick I play on my students. So what I want you to do is I want to turn to your neighbors in groups of 2 or 3 or 4, and I want you to converse among yourselves and see what question arises from your group. except we have one brave soul all the way in the back who has a question.
Yeah, so we'll just move from here. I think we have a gentleman here.
Oh, okay. So let's go ahead and go with questions.
So this is regards to plagiarism in research. If we use ChatGPT or any other tool and put it in any part of it in our research paper, it quickly shows up in Turnitin. So how obviously it should also show up, but how do we deal with the same?
So a challenge with things like Turnitin is, for example, one student was accused of plagiarism by and it came back with some super high percentage, like 90% chance that she had plagiarized her paper. And so she said, I did not plagiarize my paper. So what she did was she turned around, she got some of her professor's papers that were published 5 years before ChatGPT ever came out and put it into Turnitin and found sections of that paper that were 95% possibility of being plagiarized. So what can happen is that some of the current methods that are used to detect plagiarism when it comes to ChatGPT just don't seem to work very well. It can't really, we can't detect whether something is produced by ChatGPT. And think about it this way. If you're writing a paper and you show it to your wife, and she comes up with some ideas and says, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't have said this, you should have said this. Do you put a citation in your paper that says, my wife came up with this, way of phrasing things? We don't normally do that. And so when ChatGPT, like when I go in, I might enter a paragraph at a time of what I'm writing and say, is there a way to rephrase this to be better? And I might look at it and use that to, as a consideration as I'm formulating my final document. Do I go in and say, I had a little bit of advice from ChatGPT while I was while I was finalizing this? No, I don't, because it's kind of the same as, do I put in a footnote that says, my husband read this, my friends read this, my colleague read this and recommended this. It's an advisor. I see it as an advisor because ultimately I'm the one who finalizes what I submit. So I'm not sure if that really addressed the perceptive question that you asked. So if I didn't get it quite, please just ask on. There are other aspects. And the challenge for us now, we're at the cutting edge of the revolution that ChatGPT and generative AI is causing. And we really don't have answers to some of these questions.
For example, in social sciences, there's a large part which we devote to literature review. I mean, in other subjects, I'm not very sure, but in management subjects, economics, etc., a part of the robustness of your work is shown through your literature review, and you try to find a gap in your research work or in that body of literature through let's say that literature review. Now the entire literature review can be done by ChatGPT or these AI generative AI tools. Now there are two parts. One is how much credit you give or how much importance you give to the fact that this has not been generated through robust research by the researcher himself. The other part is that the entire growth of the researcher himself or herself would be dependent on everything that's being generated by something else. The researcher
yeah.
is not, but the researcher is getting credit in the academia, getting promotions, let's say getting importance in the peer group just because they are able to publish something which they didn't generate it themselves. So morally it seems wrong.
Well, I think that is wrong to go in and say, here's a research review and it was generated by ChatGPT. Now, but by the same token, if I'm writing a research review and I might go into some of these, like SCITE site, and ask it to look also to see if I've missed things, you know, if I'm writing the review and I'm checking everything, absolutely, then I feel comfortable that I can author it, and I've just been informed about things I might have missed. But if ChatGPT or one of these generates the whole review, yeah, I would say I agree with you. You have to put it down as a co-author or something of that nature, or an author, which of course many journals don't want to have, because the reality is, as I mentioned here, ChatGPT can confabulate things. Now, there are problems in science. You can go to some journals, pay a fee, and they'll publish your paper, and you can look really good, and you're just using a publication factory to pad your resume. So, yes, are there ways? There's plenty of ways besides artificial intelligence that science is subverted, and I too think these are reprehensible, and we have to do our best to, keep things on an honest basis. So, very good question. Very good question.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think there's a gentleman here. Yeah, sorry.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Dr. Manoj Anavkar. I just wanted to know that we can find out the things which are available using generative AI. But suppose if you are finding a research gap, and I want to know that this particular thing has not done anywhere in the world, so really it is an innovative thing. So can I use Gen AI to find out the research gaps?
Oh, so you have to be aware that a lot of generative AI platforms are not up to date. So, like, I forget, it's maybe 2022 or 2023 is Claude. Claude cuts off at that. ChatGPT, I think it's updated earlier this year. Supposedly Grok, the platform with a K at the end, that is supposed to be, really up to date. So sometimes if you go and ask a platform something for some gap, you might get some misleading information just because it's not really up to date. But the thing is, you want to bring generative AI into whatever you are researching, because I want to. Can I give you a little 3-minute talk about why you want to bring generative AI into whatever? You've led to such a great segue into. So let me answer your question in part by going over here and bringing up. Let's see, where is this? There we go. Okay. So I just want to talk about memory momentarily. So we'll talk about working memory, long-term memory, and octopuses. So I had mentioned before that working memory is like you're conscious of it. It's what you're holding temporarily in mind. And I like to model it with an octopus, but it's only got 4 arms. So I call it a quadrupus. And you can hold one piece of information with each arm. And typically, people can hold a maximum of about 4 pieces of information in mind at once. And that's what I'm modeling with these little waggly arms right there. So that octopus can hold 4 things in mind, and long-term memory is like a set of lockers, and inside those lockers are sets of neural links. So when you're learning something new, your working memory is creating these sets of links, and then it is storing those sets of links in long-term memory so you can pull them to mind later whenever you might need them. Your working memory can reach out and get them. So this brings me to my younger daughter, Rachel. So Rachel, not long before I filmed this, she had just learned how to back up a car. And so I asked her to model what it felt like when she was learning to back up a car. So watch Rachel's little face as she's trying to back up the car. So she's like, do I look in the mirror on the right? No, on the left. No, which way do I look? And then off she goes into the ditch. So the thing is, when she was first learning to back up a car, her working memory had a heavy cognitive load. All of her arms on that octopus were busy. But once she learned how to back up the car, all she has to do is think, oh, I want to back up the car. She pulls those links to mind, and she has a light cognitive load, and she's got working memory available for more complex thinking. When our students are going to take one of our tests, we want them to kind of hop up into their testing chair, and we have a test made up for them, and they have to reach into their long-term memory, pull out sets of links, connect them in a creative new way for the examination problems that we're asking them to solve, and voila, if they have practiced, they've got those links in mind. But if they haven't really got those links in mind, what they can do is they can sit there at the test, and that's the first time they realize that they don't have any links in long-term memory. So they come to you and they say, I suffer from test anxiety. I really knew the material better than the test showed, which they didn't, but they hadn't tested themselves. The thing that I want you to realize is our working memory has only 4, maybe a few more arms on exceptional people. But mostly you can only hold a limited amount of information in your working memory. But ChatGPT has thousands of arms. It can hold all this new information in mind at once, and so this can give you really good ways to look creatively at the material that's out there and make combinations that our human brain can't really do. So that's why Ethan Mullick's book is titled Co-Intelligence. It means use it with your intelligence, to think more creatively about things. So I love ChatGPT as a research tool. There's going to be remarkable new developments, particularly in the medical field. In our own lives, we will be seeing advances in medicine that are, they'll be curing diseases which we've never been able to figure out the answer for. There may even be life extension and so forth. And it sounds like hype, but if you really understand, like protein folding is you're trying to predict how a protein is going to fold by virtue of its structure. And it's a really tedious, time-consuming process to try and predict the shape of a protein. But you have to do that to make new medicines. But generative AI can make these predictions easily. It's amazing. And so things that take us years, it can do in seconds. So there's going to be some remarkable new things coming out of research. And thank you for your forbearance as I walk through working memory and long-term memory. But that was such a perfect question for, to lead into how important this is in co-creativity. Other questions?
Any questions?
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. I really liked your slides and it was very engaging. Thank you so much for that. So my question is, what kind of collaborative opportunities we can have in the field of generative AI? Like, we would really like to work with different professors across the, other universities. So how could we go about it, or what collaborative opportunities can we have?
Oh, you know what I would do? I would go to Claude and I would ask exactly that question. And I would try, so you'll get different answers off of different platforms. So go to Claude, ask Claude, because Claude is here's how perceptive Claude is. They put 1 million garbage words into Claude. And they put one sentence kind of in the middle that made sense. And then they asked Claude a question about what the contents of that sentence were. So if it could pick that sentence out from all the garbage, and not only did it pick that information out from that one sentence, but then it answered the question and said, you put all these garbage words in here to try to see if you could trick me, didn't you? It came up with that all by itself. It's almost, it really spooked the engineers at Anthropic, which makes Claude. So that one can really give you some unusual insights, but also go to ChatGPT because it's more up to date. Go to Mistral, one of those new ones, and go to Gemini and so forth. Ask that question of them. And always just, right now, like, let's say that you are traveling, like I am traveling. I arrive, I look, there's a weird coffee maker that I have never seen before in my room. So what do? I take a picture of it. And then I load it onto ChatGPT and I say, how do I use this coffee maker? And it gives me step-by-step instructions. I can, if I wanted to, I could go to my library, my books on my bookshelf. I can take a picture of it, of my books on the bookshelf, and I can say, can you give me a list organized by author's last name of all the books on my library shelves? And it will do that for you. So think not only of words that you can put in, but pictures that you can put in. You could put in a picture of a sushi plate and ask it how you make this, and it will give you great advice. So yeah, there's lots of. We've only touched the surface of what these kinds of generative AI devices can do. You can think of it kind of like a chemist understands all of the specific, or a lot of the specifics about pigments and of paint that an artist uses. But that artist doesn't have the knowledge that the chemist has. But the artist can be really creative with those paints, even though they don't know all the chemistry. Similarly, we may not understand all of what's going on underneath the hood of the transformers and of generative AI, but we can still be incredibly creative with it. And even the creators of transformers and generative AI, they don't understand why it's doing some of the things it's doing. So it's really a new world that's quite exciting. Okay, more questions.
Good morning, ma'am. So I had two questions. The The first question is, the generative AI, like, firstly, how do we skill against the generative AI? See, generative,
Say
okay.
again.
Yeah, so generative AI, as you rightly mentioned, has 10,000 arms. So how do you compete against generative AI? Like, you make it as a friend of yours, but like, how do you compete with other users who are using generative AI?
Oh, okay. So remember that generative AI is kind of like your assistant who is occasionally psychotic. So, use it. How do you compete with other people who are using generative AI? That's where your own knowledge is going to make a difference. Think about it this way. Like the course I did with Terry Sanowski, Learning How to Learn, is a completely new way of looking at how people learn that grows from a neuroscientific foundation. Could generative AI have come up with that course? No way. You know, our you tend to neglect how important the prompt is, what you ask of it. And that comes from inside you and what you know. And again, this is why you as professors are so important, is because you are teaching students and you are helping motivate them to get that knowledge inside their own head. So your best bet to be competitive in a world where generative AI is big is to learn as much as you can so you can be really critically aware when you are prompting and when you are getting feedback from generative AI.
Okay, so there is a second part of the question is like, as you said, generative AI cannot generate the like courses like that. So basically, if you train a generative AI enough on such courses, it will soon be able to generate courses of that level, right?
I don't think so.
Like in the not the video part, but the text part is pretty much like we are capable of doing that right now.
What it can do is, so what So I have gone. So I am working. I'm just finalizing a critical thinking course on Coursera. So I, for fun, went in and asked ChatGPT to generate the scripts for a 70,000 word critical thinking course. It gave me a bunch of like just garbage. You like very predictable stuff, not stuff that was wrong. Any number of bad stuff. It couldn't generate a good course. Now, could it? Maybe in the future. Maybe. I don't want to say that humans are magical and only we can be creative, because that's not true. But that conscious, deliberative thinking that only humans seem to have right now is an important part of creating courses.
Okay, so this arises another question in my mind. That is, how do you differentiate between good courses? Like someone has generated a course via ChatGPT, and someone has taken efforts to make their content good. So how do you how do you differentiate between those courses?
Oh, easy. There's a website called Class Central. It's, you know how on Amazon, and I'm sure in other, some of the places where you can purchase things here in India online, it will give you a star rating system. So if you go to Class Central, it has a star rating system for all the new online courses and the older online courses. And you can do a comparison, for example, between a course that might be on Udemy as opposed to a course that's on Coursera, and it will tell you the best courses. So if you're interested in, Python programming, you can go and ask for some of the top, ask for courses on Python programming, and then look at the top ranked courses.
And I had just one question.
Okay, one last one.
Yeah, just one last one. Okay. So you said the IQ, general trend of the IQ is decreasing after 1970s. So how can we use ChatGPT to improve our IQ? Like you said, mnemonics, metaphors. So what else can we do so as to improve our IQ?
Oh, it's like you're a plant that I put in the audience just so that I could show some stuff that I wanted to show? That's a great question. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is, let's see, hang on here. Okay, come here, where is that? Okay, hang on. Okay, there we go. Okay, you fine young man, you. This is a great question. Okay, so this is an example of how you can use AI to help you remember things better. So this is one of my favorite websites. It's called I Do Recall, but there are other flashcard websites as well. So watch what happens. Like this is called I Do Recall. Now for you as teachers, see in the corner there where it says groups, right under I Do Recall, you can create a group for your class and they can go in and collectively make their own flashcards. So if you look here, see where it says drag your study materials here? So you can see how this plays out. Oh, I forgot. I've got sound, so I better turn this off. Okay, come on. Okay, so see, there's I Do Recall. Load your file on, and then once you've got that file loaded on, so pick it out. You can load the some paper, save it, and then see where it says AI up in the corner there. You can press that, and it will create flashcard questions for you from everything on that page. So you can quiz yourself on what is on that electronic page. And it will create these very nice questions. Or if you see something and you want to create a flashcard so you'll remember it, you can just click AI, and then it will create, using Gen AI, a nice flashcard for you. And then you can go and take that flashcard. So if you like it, you save it. Now you can practice with it. So it's asking you, what do transformer networks learn to predict? They learn to predict long-range dependencies. So then you got that correct, so hooray. And you can also do things on this flashcard system as with some others. You can also go to YouTube and take the script and create flashcards from there. You can have statistics and so forth. So I want to ask you a question. So let us go over here, and I'm going to ask you a question, and you should know the answer to this question. What's the most effective way to help students learn effectively? So is it rereading, highlighting, retrieval practice, which is like using flashcards, or is it creating a concept map? How many vote for rereading? How many vote? Okay, we've got some brave souls here. Okay, how many highlighting? You get to vote for one thing. How many retrieval practice or recall? Flashcards, okay. How many concept map? Oh man, the concept map people have such good public relations, because the answer is retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is way better than those other techniques. And it's because when you're first learning something, you are like laying these super weak links, like what you learned today, weak links in long-term memory. But each time you retrieve it from your own memory, you are strengthening those sets of links. So retrieving is really good. And it's not just, I'm going to do a rote memorization of what is on this page. No, think like if you're walking home. As you're walking, you're retrieving, what was the key idea I learned today? how does this relate to what I'm doing in my classes? You're making connections, you're retrieving and connecting things. So it's a super valuable approach to learning, and hopefully that gives you a little sense of how you can use AI to improve your capacity to learn, remember, and think, and even think critically. So I think we're right at the bell. One last question, and then we'll, yeah.
Okay. As you told that 1970 the calculator was introduced, after 50 years each and everywhere we are using calculator.
Oh, what was
the calculator, each and every day we are using calculators, right? After 50 years of invention, right?
Right.
When GenAI started right now in 2000 onwards, right, 2020 onwards, GenAI is a buzzword nowadays. People are using each and every bit of it in GenAI. Suppose making a letter or applications or research. So after 20, 30 years, don't you think that they the companies will collect all the informations, all the personal informations from my chart, my behavior? Based on that, they collect all the information. Don't you think that after 50 years there will be a political instability, because somewhere we are entering into the privacy of the individuals, right? When I'm writing something, it will capture my behavior. Okay, so and from that behavior, when I'm writing something, they develop another model, right? A more sophisticated model. Day by day, the Gen AI will be more sophisticated, more accurate. Probably, if you go back 40 years, probably once 1 crore people are using calculator. Now each and everybody is using calculator. After 30 years, each and everybody will using Gen AI, right? Chat GPT, and writing something, right? And they collect the informations, and they use that informations. Probably you think about politicians are also using for the defense person will also using chat GPT.
So what the point you're bringing up is really an important one. The thing is, whenever you have a new technology, there's going to be good things and there's going to be bad things. Like when writing first came out, the cuneiform printing on tablets, and all the memory experts said, oh, this is horrible because people will not work to develop their memory. And similarly, there is a big danger along the lines of what you are exactly talking about. So I'm working on a course about the importance of free speech, and being able to criticize things like this. Is this something that we need to worry about as a society worldwide? Absolutely. Is there a solution, an easy solution? No. That's just like with the memory experts saying, you're going to lose your memory when you start writing. Yeah, they're right. But, the useful aspects are such that we can't stop the wave. It's going to keep going over us. We have to just do the best we can to, as a society, appropriately address it. And we do have to be, so part of my research involves pathologies of altruism, and that is when you are, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So sometimes our very intentions to legislate things that will be safer for people can actually inadvertently backfire and make things even worse. So you're raising a very important and good issue, and I just agree it's a problem.
That we are discussing because in Nazi war, that point of time, in German, they collect all the informations from the letters, from the diaries, and they go for that World War II, develop the strategies for the war.
There are real dangers, and there's also dangers because the platforms are really biased. They say they're not biased. They try not to be biased, but they're biased in the way that leans too hard into not trying to be biased, and that creates problems too. So that book that I mentioned, The Alignment Problem, talks about some of these issues that but there's many more working on AI safety and, and data regulations and so forth. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your attention today. Wonderful, wonderful questions. Thank you so much.
Encouraging a nice session what we had today. There are lot many things you have shared with us. Definitely metaphor is being used by all of us in our classes. But yes, chat gpt can also help us to get better and brilliant metaphors for our classes, for engineering as well as our technology management department. Thanks a lot, and I hope all faculty members who have listened to you today, they are encouraged to utilize these tools more and more in their classes and for planning their classes effectively. And definitely they are going to be coming up with their own ways of using it and coming up with their own ideas to add to make this Gen AI more effective, because we have AI department here. They are continuously working on that area and they have a very good dedicated lab for that. Thank you very much.